I'll never forget how his hands shook when he passed me that envelope. Inside was $20,000 in cash. Elliot Morrow, 83, maybe 84, sat quietly in the back seat of my dented gray Corolla, the kind that carried the smell of wilted grass and fertilizer long after my landscaping business went under. Rain hammered the windshield in heavy, uneven waves, a gray October storm that made the city feel like it was dissolving around us. "You remind me of someone I lost," he murmured, pressing a small ivory business card into my palm. His voice trembled, but his eyes, wet and glassy, were steady, as if he wanted to memorize my face. Something in that moment cracked open the air between us. It felt deliberate, fated, like some unseen thread had pulled our paths together for just that breath of time. 12 hours later, he was gone. His lawyer called at dawn. I was sitting in my car outside a McDonald's half asleep when the phone buzzed. By noon, I was in a downtown office surrounded by polished marble, leather chairs, and the faint smell of expensive cologne. The lawyer, a man named Conrad Wexler, told me Elliot had left me $87 million. My brain went blank. I remember blinking, waiting for him to correct himself to tell me it was a typo, a cruel misunderstanding. But then he slid across a letter, written in a shaky hand, signed just hours before Elliot's heart stopped beating. As he read it aloud, the words broke me open. I collapsed into that chair and cried, the kind of raw, gasping cry that makes people rush toward you thinking you're dying. The truth in that letter tore through everything I thought I knew about my family, about who I was and where I came from. Elliot hadn't just given me money. He'd given me a reason to believe that fate wasn't just some cosmic joke, that even when everything you build burns down, there's a kind of grace waiting in the ashes. 6 months earlier, I'd watched bulldozers level the greenhouse my father and I built from scratch. Merrow and Sons Landscaping. 12 employees, 5 country clubs, a few dozen private estates, and one stubborn dream. When it all fell apart, my younger brother Ryan told me I hadn't just lost a business, I'd lost his trust. "You cost me my home, my kids' future. You don't get to call yourself my brother anymore," he'd said. His words hit harder than any foreclosure notice. Dad kept leaving me voicemails offering help without calling it help. "I've got money just sitting there, son. Maybe you can put it to use for me," he'd say, pretending it was a favor to him. I couldn't take it. Pride is a strange kind of hunger. It eats you slower, but emptier. I slept in my car behind a Walmart for 3 months. The leather seat became bed, desk, and cage all in one. Every morning, the sound of delivery trucks backing up became my alarm clock. I'd buy the cheapest coffee I could find, shave in a restroom mirror, and tell myself I still had a chance. The Uber app became my last lifeline. Every ping, every stranger's face appearing on the screen felt like the universe whispering, "Maybe this one will matter."
Maybe enough gas to last another day. Maybe enough for a shower at the truck stop off Highway 52. Maybe, if I caught a few airport runs, enough to keep paying rent on the storage unit that held what was left of my old life, my father's worn tools, photo albums from when the business still had a pulse, and the mahogany desk where I'd once signed contracts that made me feel invincible. My ex-wife, Leah, had been right about one thing before she walked out. We were sitting in the kitchen of the house I'd built with loans and denial, granite countertops, custom cabinets, all for show. She looked at me like she was trying to memorize who I used to be, and said, "Eli, you don't ask for help until you're already underwater, and by then you've pulled everyone else down with you." After the divorce, she went back to Texas with our daughter June. I got supervised visits when I could scrape together the gas money for the drive. June was 7, old enough to sense that her dad had fallen from something, too young to see the size of the hole he'd fallen into. I'd tell her I was just between adventures, and she'd smile like she believed it. That Tuesday morning in October, the rain came down like a punishment. Minneapolis rain has this way of cutting through you in the fall. Cold, sharp, prophetic. It warns you that winter's coming, that whatever you haven't fixed by now won't survive the freeze. My wipers smeared the water instead of clearing it, making every mile look like it was seen through tears. I'd been awake since 4, 3 mides deep, $43 earned after gas. I'd done the math 1,000 times. 43 covered one more day for the storage unit, but meant I'd skip dinner again. When the next ping came through, airport pickup, Terminal B to downtown, I almost ignored it. 45 minutes each way if the traffic gods were kind, which they never were when it rained. My gas light had been glowing for 2 days, a quiet orange reminder of how far I had fallen from the man who used to manage a fleet of trucks. I was running on fumes, in my tank, in my wallet, in my soul. One more day, I muttered, accepting the ride. It had become my creed, my lifeline. One more day alive, one more day not quitting. I drove past the Riverside Club, the same one where I'd once designed a Zen garden for their members. Cherry trees, smooth stones, a water feature that whispered peace. I wondered if the new contractors had kept it alive, or if the blossoms had died along with my reputation. In this city, success fades fast, but failure disappears even faster. What I didn't know then was that in 53 minutes, a dying man would climb into the back of my car and hand me a check that would upend everything. That his story and mine had been braided together long before we ever met. That before the day ended, I'd be forced to reckon with the truth about fate, family, and the forgiveness I'd never learned to give myself.
Elliot Marrow was standing at Terminal B, looking like money without trying. Not the kind that shouts in gold watches and arrogance, but the kind that whispers through cashmere coats and shoes so perfectly made they could have been carved rather than stitched. His silver hair barely moved in the wind. The man was composed, polished even, but his eyes told on him. They were the kind of eyes I'd seen in my own reflection too many mornings, tired, searching, hollowed out by time. When I opened the trunk to load his single suitcase, a beautiful old leather piece with brass corners, he reached out and rested a trembling hand on my shoulder. "Thank you for coming out in this weather," he said softly. "I imagine it wasn't an easy drive." For the first 10 minutes, he surprised me. Most riders filled the silence with weather talk or stayed glued to their phones. Elliot asked questions, real ones, questions that required more than a polite answer. "What brought you to driving?" he asked. His voice carried the faintest trace of a Minnesota accent, softened by decades of boardrooms and private flights. "My business went under," I told him, keeping my tone light. "Landscaping. Family thing. Bad timing. Worse luck." He nodded slowly, like he already understood the shape of that kind of loss. "A family business," he said quietly. "Those can be both a gift and a curse." Something in his voice loosened my guard. "My father started it back in '92, I said. "Built it from nothing but sweat and a pickup truck. I took over thinking I could grow it faster, make it bigger. Expanded too much, trusted the wrong people. The rest you can guess." For a long while he didn't respond. He just stared out at the rain-slicked highway, the wipers dragging across the windshield like a metronome for his memories. Then, barely above a whisper, he said, "My son wanted to do the same. Expand what we'd built. Pharmaceutical distribution, we were solid, steady. He wanted to go national. I told him to wait, to be patient, that timing was everything." His voice cracked on the word everything. We hit a red light at Hennepin. I glanced in the rearview mirror just in time to see him pinch the bridge of his nose, eyes glistening. That was 37 years ago, October 15th, 1987, the day before his 22nd birthday. He let out a small, bitter laugh. I'd bought him a Rolex, had it engraved with the words, "Patience builds empires." He threw it across my office, told me I was suffocating him, that I'd never see him as anything more than my shadow. He paused then, the silence between us thick as the rain. He died 3 weeks later. Motorcycle accident. He'd been drinking, angry, trying to prove he didn't need me. Elliot fumbled for his phone and swiped through old photos until he found one. He held it up, the screen glowing in the dim light. That's him, my son, Adam. My stomach dropped. The man in the photo looked eerily familiar. The same brown eyes flecked with gold, the same stubborn jawline that could have been carved from my own reflection. A version of me that had taken a different road. Elliot studied me in the mirror, his expression unreadable. "You have his eyes," he murmured. "Brown with those little gold sparks when you talk about something you care about. Exactly the same." The conversation turned heavy without either of us meaning for it to. Elliot asked about my father, about what kind of man he was, whether we still spoke, whether I'd ever made peace with how things ended. Before I knew it, I was telling him things I hadn't said out loud to anyone. How I'd failed the family name. How my brother, Ryan, still blamed me for wrecking the business and his future. How my father defended me to anyone who'd listen, at church, at the hardware store, wherever he went, as if his belief in me could rewrite what I'd ruined. "He sounds like a good man," Elliot said softly. "The best," I whispered, which makes disappointing him feel worse. "Pull over," he said suddenly, his tone sharp, but not unkind. "Please, just for a moment." I guided the car into a Walgreens parking lot. The rain had picked up again, drumming against the roof in restless rhythms. He was breathing hard, not from effort, but from something deeper, something old. I flew here to visit his grave, first time since the funeral. I've been carrying a letter to him for 30 years. I rewrite it every birthday, every anniversary, but I've never been able to read it at his headstone. 37 years of airports and meetings, and I couldn't drive 20 minutes to Lakewood Cemetery. His voice cracked, and for the first time, he looked small, not in stature, but in sorrow. "Why now?" I asked quietly, turning toward him. The car felt like a confessional, the world outside erased by rain. "He has no one left, Eli," he said, and hearing my name in his voice sent a chill through me. "My wife Clara passed 10 years ago, heart attack in her sleep. No other children, just lawyers, employees, and a fortune that feels like a monument to my loneliness." He reached into his coat and pulled out an old leather checkbook, the kind you don't see anymore. The gold pen in his fingers glinted as he clicked it open. "Let me pay you for your time," he said. "The app handles that, Mr. Marrow," I told him. "This is different." His pen moved with surprising steadiness. He wrote, "This isn't about the ride. It's about the conversation. About you listening to an old man's regrets without trying to fix them." He tore the check neatly, folded it twice, and placed it in my hand. "Promise me you won't look at it until you're home, and promise me that tonight, wherever you're sleeping, you'll call your father. Tell him you love him. Tell him you're sorry. Tell him anything except nothing." His eyes had changed, no longer hollow but burning with urgency. He said, "I would trade every dollar, every property, every stock I've ever owned for one more argument with my son. One more chance to say, 'You were right. I should have trusted you. Your impatience was passion, not rebellion.'" He handed me his card then, heavy paper, raised letters, the kind that felt like it belonged to someone who mattered. "If you ever need anything, not money, not favors, just someone who understands what it means to fail at the only thing that really matters, call me. I drove him the rest of the way to the Graves Hotel downtown. Neither of us spoke, but the silence between us wasn't hollow. It pulsed with meaning, like the air itself understood we were carrying something fragile. When we pulled up to the entrance, I insisted on helping with his suitcase, though a bellhop had already appeared under the golden glow of the marquee. The hotel's Art Deco awning shimmered under the rain, the same shelter that had guarded Minneapolis's elite for a century. At the curb, Elliot gripped my hand with both of his, the rain clinging to his silver lashes. "You know what the cruelest irony is," he said. "I spent 37 years building an empire worth hundreds of millions, and I'd trade every penny for one more argument with my son. One more slammed door. One more morning of him walking back in, stubborn as ever, with new plans and that fire in his eyes." He squeezed my hand tighter. "Your father's alive, Eli. He's still breathing, still waiting. Don't make him wait 37 years for a ghost to show up." Then he was gone, disappearing into the revolving door, into the warm light, leaving me in the rain with his words echoing in my head. I sat there for 20 minutes, engine off, just holding the folded check and his business card like they were sacred relics. When I finally drove back to my usual spot behind the Walmart, I waited until the lot went still. Then, under the pale glow of a flickering streetlight, I unfolded the check. $20,000. Written in shaky handwriting, signed in bold, deliberate strokes. From a stranger who saw his dead son in my eyes. At 10 that night, I called my father. I knew he'd still be awake. He never slept much these days, always tinkering with something to avoid his thoughts. When he answered, I couldn't speak at first. "Eli?" he said, his voice thick with worry. "Son, are you all right?" "Dad," was all I managed before everything came pouring out. The rain, the old man, the story of his son, the check, the guilt, the fear that I'd let our name rot in the dirt. I sobbed until I couldn't breathe, sitting in that car with the rain pounding like fists on the roof. "I'm coming," he said simply. "Tell me where you are." 2 hours later, he found me in that parking lot. He didn't say anything, just opened his arms and pulled me in. I cried into his shoulder, shaking, trying to make sense of why a dying stranger had seen something in me that I couldn't even see in myself. I fell asleep at his house that night, in my old room, surrounded by faded posters and dusty trophies that once meant everything. At dawn, my phone rang. Unknown Minneapolis number. "Mr. Morrow, this is Conrad Wexler from Wexler & Associates. I'm afraid I have difficult news. Mr. Elliot Morrow passed away last night." For a moment, the world went quiet. "Last night?" I whispered. "But I just dropped him off." "He went peacefully in his sleep. The staff found him this morning when he didn't answer his wake-up call. He called me at 8 p.m. last night, insisted we amend his will immediately. When I suggested waiting until morning, he told me, and I quote, 'I've waited 37 years too long already. Not one more night.'" The drive back to Minneapolis felt unreal. My father rode with me, silent except for the times he reached over and squeezed my shoulder. The $20,000 check was still in my wallet, heavy like guilt. Wexler & Associates occupied the top floor of the IDS tower. Marble floors, polished mahogany walls, a hush that demanded reverence. Conrad looked worn down, his eyes red-rimmed, his tie loosened. He didn't look like a man doing his job. He looked like someone who'd just buried a friend. He opened a thick folder, pages marked with fresh signatures. The air in that office felt electric, like the story wasn't finished, like something larger was about to unfold. Mr. Marrow, Conrad said quietly, his voice trembling just enough to betray the weight of what he was about to say. Elliot Marrow has left you his entire estate, $89 million in liquid assets, properties in 7 states, and controlling interest in Marrow Distribution. The room tilted. My father's hand shot out, gripping my arm before I could fall. "That's impossible," I said. "He didn't even know me. We met yesterday." Conrad took a slow breath and slid a single envelope across the polished table. On it was Elliot's name, written in a hand that shook but still held authority. "He knew more than you might think," Conrad said. "He left this for you. He asked that I read it aloud." He unfolded the paper, and Elliot's voice filled the room. "Eli, I know you'll try to refuse this, so let me tell you something that will change your mind. After my son died, my wife Clara and I hired an investigator. We wanted to know about his last days, the life he lived when he wasn't fighting with me about business. We learned he'd been seeing a girl named Jennifer Marrow. She worked at a flower shop near the university. She was pregnant when he died." My chest tightened. Jennifer Marrow, my father's younger sister. She died when I was 10. I remembered the whispers at family gatherings, the talk about a baby she'd given up, and a grief she never named. My father stood, pacing toward the window, one hand covering his mouth. "Jenny never told us. She never said who the father was." Conrad continued reading. "Jennifer disappeared after my son's death. We tried to find her, but never could. Clara never forgave herself for not trying harder. We could have helped her. Instead, our grief made us hesitate, and we lost our only connection to our boy. Yesterday, after I left you, I asked my investigators to try again, with tools we didn't have in the 80s. They found Jennifer's records. She died in 2005. But before she did, she gave birth to a son on June 15, 1988. She placed him for adoption in Portland. His name now is Samuel Dean. He's 36, married, with 3 children." Conrad paused, watching me as if to make sure I was still breathing. "That boy, your cousin, was my grandson. He looks just like my Brock did. Same eyes, same jaw, same hands that know the shape of work. But here's why I changed my will. You could have taken advantage of me yesterday. I was an old man, emotional, clearly wealthy. But you didn't. You listened. You reminded me that sons who fall short of their father's expectations still deserve love. You reminded me what forgiveness looks like. You are family, Eli, not by blood, but by spirit. You are the man my son might have become, flawed, stubborn, kind." Conrad's voice broke slightly as he finished reading. The room was silent except for the soft hum of the city through the windows. 3 weeks later, I met Samuel in a Portland cafe. He had Elliot's eyes and my aunt's faint, melancholy smile, the kind people wear when they've spent years wondering who they came from. "My adoptive parents gave me everything," he said, stirring his coffee. "But there was always this hole, like someone tore out a page from the story before I was born." He smiled sadly. "Now I know she gave me up to save me from a grief that wasn't mine to carry." We stood side by side at Elliot's funeral the following week. The church was full, executives, employees, politicians, but somehow we were the only ones who felt like family. 2 men connected by a ghost, and a dying man's need for redemption. When I spoke during the service, I didn't talk about inheritance. I talked about the 40-minute car ride that changed everything. About how Elliot had given me more than money. He'd given me permission to fail without becoming a failure. I didn't rebuild my old business. That felt too small, too selfish. Instead, I started the Marrow Foundation, a trust for small business owners who'd fallen and couldn't find their footing again. Not handouts, bridges, mentors, people who understood that sometimes bankruptcy isn't the end of a dream, just the beginning of humility. Ryan runs it with me now. When I first told him the idea, he stood in the doorway for a full minute, staring at me. Then he said, "You're really going to use $89 million to help people who screwed up like we did?" I nodded. He hugged me, the first time he'd done that since the business collapsed. That was 2 years ago. Since then, we've helped more than 400 families keep their dreams alive. A bakery in North Minneapolis that couldn't afford repairs, a mechanic who lost his shop in a flood, a single mother who turned her catering side hustle into a restaurant. Every time I see one of them start again, I think of that night. The rain on the windshield, the man in the back seat with trembling hands, and how he gave me more than money. He gave me back my faith that even the broken things in us can still be used to build something good. A roofing company in Duluth whose owner got cancer and fell behind on equipment loans. A flower shop in Bloomington. Poetic, really. Run by a single mother who reminded me of what Aunt Jennifer might have been if she'd had support instead of silence. My father, Rupert, and I have dinner every Sunday now. He planted a memorial garden for Elliot behind his house where the roses grow wild and stubborn, refusing to be trimmed into something polite. Sometimes Samuel brings his kids there. They run between the beds, laughing, plucking flowers without asking, unaware that they're playing in a monument built from forgiveness that took nearly 4 decades to bloom. A month after the funeral, Conrad called again. "Elliot left you one last note," he said. It was dated the morning we met, probably written while he waited at the airport. "If you're reading this, it means I finally found the courage to let go. Don't let money be your monument, Eli. Let it be the tool that builds bridges back to the people you love. Every failed business is just a successful family waiting to remember what matters." I keep his business card in my wallet, beside an old photo of my father and me standing in front of our first greenhouse before the bulldozers came. On the back of the card, in handwriting steady and strong, he'd written a line I didn't notice until weeks later. "Every ending is just a beginning, waiting for brave enough hands to build it." Last week, a woman got into my Uber. Yes, I still drive once a week. Early Thursday runs to the airport keep me humble. They remind me how easily lives can shift in the back seat of a car. She was crying. Her restaurant had failed. Her parents had spent decades saving to help her open it, and now she couldn't face them. I listened. When we reached the terminal, I handed her a business card for the Marrow Foundation. I said, "Someone once told me that stubborn people trying to prove themselves deserve second chances." She looked at the card, then at me. "Why would you help a stranger?" I thought about Elliot, about that rain-soaked afternoon, about how his grief had become my redemption. "Because 37 years," I said softly, "it's too long to wait for forgiveness. And sometimes strangers are just family we haven't recognized yet." The greenhouse my father, Ryan, Samuel, and I are building now stands on the same patch of earth where our first one once did. There's an oak tree at its center, with a small plaque beneath it that reads, "For Elliot and Brock Marrow, who taught us that some roots run deeper than blood, and some families are grown from forgiveness." If the story reached you, if it reminded you of someone you need to call, to forgive, or to ask forgiveness from, share it. Tell your own story. Because every one of us is only a conversation away from changing a life or having ours changed. And sometimes that conversation happens in the most unexpected place. In the backseat of a car, on a rainy morning, with a stranger who sees something in you that you forgot to believe in yourself.